Sometimes life gives us lemons. Sometimes it gives us lemonade. Other times it gives us something entirely out of left field that makes us say, WTF. But no matter what obstacles come, there is most often a way out on the other side, and we are once again victorious. My name is Dr. Rowe, and you are listening to my podcast about resilience. Every guest shares a tragedy to triumph story to give listeners like you the inspiration to push through every single day. Listen now as my next guest shares how they were life-jacked.
What do you do when you become addicted to a substance or behavior and you just can't get control? My name is Dr. Rowe, and this is Life-Jacked, the Resilience Podcast. Life-Jacked is when an unfortunate or unplanned event happens to jack with your life. My guest for this week, Larry Fritzlan, is a licensed marriage and family therapist, certified addiction therapist, and a board-certified intervention professional. As a recovering addict himself, the child of an addict, and the father of an addict who lost both his son and his father to addiction, is very passionate about helping addicted individuals and their families escape the downward spiral of addiction. Fritzlan and his life partner, Avis Rumney, who is also an LMFT, a master therapist, and an award-winning author, have witnessed the transformative power of recovery and seen firsthand when addicted individuals and their families choose to recover and do the work to restore themselves to wellness. They not only repair the damage caused by addiction, but create fulfilling lives and healthier relationships. His new book, Addiction Therapy and Treatment, a Systems Approach, provides an innovative way to conquer addiction and ultimately kick the habit for good. Hi, Larry. Welcome. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show. How are you?
Well, first of all, Dr. Rowe, I'm absolutely delighted to be invited. And so at the moment, I'm really excited and happy.
Well, that's awesome. Now, I have to ask you, how did you decide to get into the field of therapy?
How did I become a psychotherapist? Boy, that's a great question. I myself, this is about addiction, the book I wrote. I'm a recovering addict myself. I started as a teenager, and it got really bad, and in my 20s and 30s, in my 30s, I finally hit a bottom and reached out for help. And it took me a couple years to realize, okay, now I got a handle on the addiction, but I'm really crazy. I have been, I was raised in an alcoholic family. I missed all the cues in high school and my 20s on how to live life, how to do jobs, how to do relationships. And so now I'm sober in my late 30s, and I realized that I'm struggling with depression, at times dysfunctional relationships, some anxiety issues. And so I sought out a psychotherapist myself at that point. And I was just amazed that that there was help for people with various mental issues. And so I think it was probably about 10 years of recovery, of being in my own different kinds of therapists, seeing all kinds of different therapists, couples therapists and so on. And I realized, wow, these guys are doing something really wonderful. And that's when I decided to go back to graduate school and go through the process of becoming a California licensed marriage and family therapist.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you had been raised in a family of an alcoholic, and then, of course, I mentioned in the introduction that your son was an addict. And so you've experienced addiction from various angles firsthand. And so did you see any signs while you were going through it, or yourself? Like, did you see the downward spiral, or it just was all of a sudden you woke up and realized, oh my gosh, I'm just like my father?
Mm-hmm. No, I don't think it quite works that way. I think that addiction is, there's sort of a joke is that denial is not a river in Egypt. It's actually a defense mechanism that our ego uses to avoid looking at the reality. But with my father, I was not aware. I knew he was angry. I knew that my parents fought. It was only when I finally left home at 18 that I found out that my mom sort of came out of the closet, so to speak, and said that he was an alcoholic. And the poor guy was never able to stop, and he died in his 50s as a direct result of that. It took me a while to really realize the experience, the depth of experience of growing up in an alcoholic family and what that can do to an individual's development. So I had lots of experience living with that, and then my own addiction, of course.
Do you believe there is maybe a special gene in people that causes them to be predisposed to addiction?
I think yes, I do. And addiction is a complex disorder. It affects about 10% of the population, which is, that's a lot of people. It's like 35 million people in America. And not that many are actually in recovery getting treatment for it. So it's much more common than we really let on. But the research shows that there's a propensity. If you grew up in an alcoholic family, there's a higher chance that you're going to develop, or an addictive family, you're going to develop that yourself. Now, part of that is the environment. If you have a really challenging childhood, you're also going to be less resilient and not have some of the natural defenses that might be able to make a difference for people on the line.
Now, most people know about the common addictions, right? Addicted to drugs, addicted to alcohol, addicted to sex, addicted to gambling. But I have come to understand that there are also other forms of addiction that people may not identify, that it actually may be some type of addiction for them. So could you share about some other ones that afflict people without them realizing that it actually may be an addiction and not just some type of habit?
Right. Yeah, at this point, it's pretty well known that addiction, the doctors and the neurologists, the brain scientists, known for, it's been almost 25 years at this point that we know that addiction is a disease. It's a disease of an organ, the brain. It's a disease unlike other chronic diseases like diabetes and asthma and hypertension. It's a real medical disease. It doesn't go away ever. All we can do is put it in remission. And it impacts, as you say, more than just the alcohol and drugs. It can be food addiction, sex addiction, electronic screens addiction, gambling addiction. There are, at last count, I think there's something like 130 different 12-step programs for the various addictions. Smokers Anonymous, Nicotine Anonymous, et cetera, et cetera. There's a new one out, Internet Technology and Gaming Addiction. And there's support groups for these addictions. And there's something about the brain of an addict that gets hyper-aroused. Not everybody. A lot of people can go out and have a party, or they can play video games. And a lot of these other substances and behaviors, and maybe they get in trouble, maybe they get hungover, maybe they do some dumb things, but they sort of get out, make decisions to get out of it, grow out of it, whatever.
Now, how do you know that you are addicted to something, right? Because I have a lot of activities that I really enjoy doing. I really like social media. Mm-hmm. I like shopping. Just as, many of us like doing these things. I like television. Every now and then I like games. But what makes it different from just really liking to do a particular activity and crossing the line in addiction? Right.
Yeah, that's a really important question, because as I mentioned, there's a tendency of the ego to deny, rationalize our behavior, and so addictionologists have come up with a shorthand. They're the 4 C's: control, consequence, craving, and chronicity. And let me unpack that a little bit. Loss of control, and you got to have all four of these. I think a lot of people lose control over eating or gaming or, partying now and then. But when we lose control, we're going to go out and have a few beers and we got drunk. We say we're going to, eat just a certain amount of food, but we end up cleaning out the kitchen. So it's loss of control. We just can't control it. The next one is adverse consequences. Most people, if they do something dumb, they make an adjustment and don't do it again. But there's something about the addict that keeps doing the same dumb thing over and over and over every time they drink. Or in my case, every time I drank too much, and I was always hungover. And I would always say, I'm not going to do that again. But I couldn't control it. There was a loss of control and the adverse consequences. And another one is craving. You might enjoy something, and that's fine, but when we crave it, there's sort of like this hunger, like it's going to fix something. And actually, addicts get a fix. It does one of two things. It either sort of gives us a temporary high, we feel better, or temporarily it takes away the pain. And it's always successful. And so there's this way that we just keep sort of chasing the hope of the fix. And the last one is chronicity. And that it means it's going on for more than 6 months. And so if you have all four of those, the loss of control, the adverse consequences, and craving, and it's been going on more than 6 months, it would be something to look at. It'd be something to check out.
Well, thank you for that and sharing those 4 C's, and warning signs, because it is hard to tell sometimes, the difference. And even I know many parents, we have teenagers and we feel like they're addicted to games and we don't know what's the difference in, maybe they just like to do it a lot and where it crosses the line into, addiction. So what would be the best way to approach a loved one or a friend if you start recognizing those 4 C's in someone else?
Well, you mentioned children. It's with minors, it's sort of the parent's responsibility to set some limits and boundaries and to unplug or take away the devices now and then so that it doesn't have an impact on their development. So that's somewhat obvious. But beyond that, with adults, how do we recognize it in somebody else? An addict's behavior is typically somewhat bizarre in some area, and as I mentioned, that they do dumb things. It appears they're out of control when they're doing it. There's not a whole lot you can do as far as helping the addict, because the addict can't help themselves. That's sort of the definition of addiction. An addict cannot stop. Let me say that again. An addict can't stop. An addict might, I'll stop tomorrow, I'll stop next year, I'll stop when I break up with this dumb relationship. But the reality is a true addict will never be able to stop by themselves. They have to get help. And so one of the things that we can do when we see family members or friends that look like they're in addiction is, one thing is to stop enabling. Almost all addicts to some extent are enabled. Stop and think about it for a second. If you nag somebody, you might think that you're doing something good by telling them they shouldn't drink so much, or they should stop doing that dumb thing. That actually is letting them know that there's still a relationship, that somebody is still there because you care enough not to leave me, dump me, or kick me out, or cut me off. You're just going to continue nagging. And so in some ways, us addictionologists see that as enabling. And so one of the key points of my approach to treatment is to actually work with the enablers, because most addicts, unless they inherited $1 million and live by themselves someplace, or $1 billion, are in relationships with others that are being enabled. And so that's one of the first things you can do is just stop enabling.
In your book, Addiction Therapy and Treatment, a Systems Approach,
Mm-hmm.
It discusses an innovative way to address addiction recovery. Could you share, without giving too much away, but could you share a little bit of your method with the listeners?
Well, it's not rocket science. In fact, it is sort of the way that marriage and family therapists work, is we look at the system. How do the two people in a marriage or the multiple people in a family, how are they working this out? How is unconscious processes perhaps creating some of the problems and the conflicts? And so this approach, I sort of backed into this. I became a licensed marriage and family therapist where, of course, we're working with the marital system or the family system, but I was also a recovering addict myself, and so I knew sort of the drug and alcohol counseling approach and put the two of them together and came up with my approach. And it's not rocket science, nor is it a secret. It's just innovative because the current model is really to focus on the addict and to send the addict off to rehab and cross our fingers. And that model, which has been around for about 90 years, is only about 50% successful. And I found that by starting out with the family members, starting out with the codependents, and I sort of collude with them. They thought that I was going to help intervene on the addict. Well, we're going to get to that, but at first I'm going to intervene on the enablers. And we're just going to develop a dialogue and start talking and get everybody, in essence, turn the lights on. And it's really surprising when the codependents start getting help for themselves through their own therapy and their own 12-step programs. The addict often looks around and goes, what the heck are you guys doing, and why are you doing it, and what's the problem? Quite often that's the wake-up sign for the addict to take a look at their own behavior.
I ask many guests on my show if they have a support system. But sometimes the support system is not necessarily a positive factor or influence in their life. Like you mentioned, enablers or codependency. So how do you know whether your support system is helping or hurting you?
That's a great question. In some ways, we're herd animals. We're primates. We like to affiliate with others in our tribe. And, imagine that everybody in your family and all your friends are cigarette smokers. How hard would it be to stop smoking with that kind of support system? It's not a support system. It actually is enabling the nicotine addiction. So it's really pivotal in addiction recovery. We have to remember that this isn't a big deal. It's just stop the addiction today and get support not to do it again tomorrow. And if we simply do that a day at a time and get that support, after a while we have been in remission for some time when we begin to wake up and finally our brains work even better, and then we can start utilizing even more tools. So it's essential to get a support system. And most doctors and psychologists, mental health practitioners, and 12-step programs and other kinds of addiction support systems are all around. It's just amazing. In my community of 250,000, there's close to 500 different 12-step meetings each week. And so they're easy to find all hours of the day. But it really comes down to that for addiction is, can I stop my addiction today, which I can't. By definition, I can't stop without help. And so I get the help, I get a therapist, I find a support group. And this may be a little bit of a big question for your listeners. All I can say is we're here. Just keep looking. Google us, call us, ask your neighbors, ask your doctor. Everybody knows in the field about addiction treatment, and we're readily available.
Now, obviously, since you said that about 10% of the population is affected by addiction, and I'm assuming whether that's directly or indirectly, and if it's indirectly, it's probably a little bit higher of a percentage, right? So that means many people come from families with addiction cycles, much as yourself. Mm-hmm. And that there are a couple of family members that I have that have certain addictions. What education can we give to our children for young teens to help them identify these patterns and maybe hopefully break the cycle?
Mm-hmm. I think that people 100 years from now are going to look back on those of us that are living in this age, and just like we could look back on the people 100 years ago, if we go back to 1924, there were so many things that we were doing then that we've come to see as unhealthy and that there's treatment for and are no longer a problem. I think that mental health is sort of a stigma. I mean, we don't hesitate if we have a broken leg or the flu or any one of thousands of medical problems to go to a doctor. We do it all the time. But mental health is something that there's a bit of a stigma. It's like to be in control is really important, when the reality is that mental illnesses are just as ubiquitous, just as common as medical diseases. And lots of times we sort of suck it up and live a life of depression or addiction or dysfunctional relationships, when in fact all we need to do is reach out for help. And I have a little thing that I always say: recovery from addiction or any mental illness is simple. 3 steps, 1, 2, 3. 1, recognize the problem. And I've talked about how our ego wants to deny the problem, so that's part of it. It's got to recognize that there's a problem. The second thing is ask for help. And the third thing is follow the suggestions. That's simple. Recognize the problem, ask for help, and follow the suggestions. Us mental health practitioners are just like medical practitioners. We're all over. We're trained to do all kinds of things. But we can't help anybody if they're not going to talk to us and ask for help.
Well, that's definitely the truth.
Right.
What do you believe has been the most rewarding part of your work?
Oh, my goodness. The most rewarding part of my work is watching others. You mentioned my father and my son. Recently, my brother passed away from addiction. And it's just been heartbreaking that I have watched him. He was my best buddy. We both sort of grew up and went through a lot of stuff together. When I got into recovery a long time ago, I invited him, and he says, "Nah, I'm good." And he wasn't, and he got worse and worse and worse. And the poor guy, when he died, he didn't have any teeth left. And the most rewarding is watching people recover from this. It's really addiction is really a simple disease. It's one of the simplest mental illnesses to get over. All we have to do is acknowledge we have a problem and ask for help and follow some simple guidelines, and we are done. We won't have it. Now, we have a chronic relapsing disease, so we have to stick with it a day at a time. And I've been sober many, many, many years, and I still go to pretty much an average of 1 meeting a day. It's 1 hour a day, not to have 24 hours of a miserable life. So I think the math works out. But in my practice, I've been working here in my practice in California for 25 years now. And there are many, many dozens of families that have gone from spiraling down into addiction and dysfunction to being in recovery. And I see their kids, and in some cases their kids' kids, and it's just so heartwarming to have a job, to have a profession, to have a career where I can take my experience and the pain that I experienced in my disease and to turn it around and to be able to help other people. It's one of the greatest things that one could imagine.
I believe that the work that you're doing is simply amazing, and especially the fact that you're a recovering addict yourself, so you know firsthand the process, what people are feeling, what they're going through, and I think, that's major within the work that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Now, in your opinion, what are the best ways to build resilience?
Oh, wow. Well, let's just take two extreme examples. The person that gets up, moves around, is active, walks, perhaps plays sports. On one hand, on the other one, somebody that sits in front of a television their whole life. It's so obvious what's going to happen. One is going to be able in their old age to keep walking and being active and even playing sports perhaps, whereas the other one is just going to melt into the sofa and become a slob. And so I think that when we begin taking care of ourselves, when we begin loving ourselves, when we begin asking for help, when we start hanging around other people that are also alive and going someplace, it's sort of contagious. And so I have found that by continuing to work on my own recovery, to continue to explore, I still talk to a psychotherapist. I'm still dealing with some of my childhood trauma. That's there, and I think basically I have a very happy life and a very happy marriage, but it has taken a lot of work to get to this place. And I think that I'm much more resilient now, obviously, than when I was a practicing addict, for sure.
Well, Larry, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you. Please take the time to let everyone know how they can get a copy of your book or contact you if they are interested in participating in a session with you.
Absolutely. Well, I think the hard part is the spelling of my name because that's the website and that's the title or the author of the book. And so it's Larry Fritzlan, and that's Fritzlan. And if you go on Amazon, you'll see that I've been the author of a number of books on addiction, but the most current one is called Addiction Therapy and Treatment, A Systems Approach. But I'm also the author of 3 other books, My Addicted Child, My Addicted Spouse, and My Addicted Parent. And then I have a website, which is my name, LarryFritzlan.com. And if you go to my website, you'll see a listing of some therapists that work the model that I have developed, and including my own contact information, my phone number. And if somebody's interested in an assessment, we can set that up. They can get a hold of me through my website, LarryFritzlan.com.
Any last words of encouragement for the listeners?
Well, first of all, Dr. Rowe, I want to thank you. The fact that you're doing this and making this available to the public is just really a godsend. And so I'd say to the public out there, be brave. You have the courage to change the things you can, which is your own life. And if it's not going swimmingly, remember my 3 simple suggestions here. Recognize the problem, ask for help, and follow the suggestions.
Well, Mr. Fritzlan, thank you so much. I wish you and your family nothing but blessings and abundance. Please take care.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rowe.
Hey, are you really loving this podcast, or did you really enjoy this week's episode? Then please subscribe, like, rate, and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. And remember to live, laugh, love, learn, and then repeat. See you in the next episode.